At 5:42 on 18 February 1944, Sergeant Leon McBride lies face down in the broken stone of Monte Cassino. His world shrunk to the 7 inches of sky above a shattered crater lip. The air is cold enough to sting the inside of his nose, about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, damp with night fog rolling off the Leary Valley. The rubble under his ribs is jagged, chalky, soaked with last night's rain and yesterday's blood. His fingers, bare inside the trigger guard, feel both numb and overlive at the same time, every heartbeat pulsing through the steel of the M1903A4 in his hands. To his left and right, the hillside is a dead place, chewed monasteries of stone, blasted olive trees, shell craters overlapping like fingerprints. Somewhere behind him, 40 yards upslope, the American line huddles in slit trenches and foxholes, waiting for daylight and the next German ranging round. Leon is alone, that part is by design. He's forward of the line, belly in a crater that nobody wanted, a place other men called suicide and walked past. The crater's edge is only chest-high if he stands, barely knee-high if he kneels. No good cover, the lieutenant said. No field of fire, the company captain said. A waste of time, the regimental major added, after glancing once at Leon's sketched plan. They hadn't been here in the dark, with a shovel, a machinist's eye, and 6 hours to kill. Under his weight, the crater lip is not just raw earth anymore. It is cut, shaved, shaped, scraped to a precise angle between 35 and 40 degrees, so that the top 7 inches of Leon's helmet and the upper curve of his rifle's scope can clear the horizon without making a silhouette against the sky. The forward face of the lip is undercut slightly, so any muzzle flash snaps against stone instead of flaring outward. His left elbow rests on a sandbag which he built himself. Inside the burlap is not sand, but pulverized brick, fine as flour, packed tight to deaden vibration. Under the bag, he placed a scavenged strip of truck inner tube so the sandbag wouldn't skid. Around the inner rim of the crater, he carved, by thick-fingered feel in the dark, a narrow depression, an entry track. He padded it with torn shelter halves and burlap so he could crawl, slide his rifle, and raise into position without the telltale clink of metal on rock. It is his silent entry perch, his groundhog hole, his waste of time. The officers had laughed, some politely, some not at all. One staff captain with spotless boots had stood at the rim and said, "You can't fight a war with a carpenter's level, Sergeant. Just take a proper position like everyone else." Leon had said nothing, he almost never did. Now, in the gray just before dawn, the war comes to his little mistake of earth. Through the glass of his scope, fog softens the world into gray shapes and darker smears. At first there is only rubble and the black crosshatch of broken olive branches, then movement. A shadow detaches from a wall at 90-odd yards downslope, then another from a shell-bitten terrace. German boots tap and scrape on stone, sound carried strangely in the cold, thin air. 7 men. 6 with rifles slung and gear light, one with the unmistakable angular bulk of an MG-42 across his shoulders, the barrel forward, the tripod folded like insect legs behind his neck. Scouts and a gunner. They move with the slow, methodical confidence of men who have done this before. Spacing is irregular, 15 yards, then 10, then 20. No straight line, no easy pattern. Each man covers a slightly different sector, shoulders turning, head swiveling, eyes-seeking movement. Leon watches through the scope as one of them, a corporal by the look of the chevrons on his sleeve, pulls a rolled panel from his pack, a rectangle of colored cloth, the kind artillery spotters use to mark friendly positions. Another man carries a range pole, a third has a leather case that will hold a map board or rangefinder. They are not here to attack. They are here to measure, to mark, to make the hillside behind Leon into a set of coordinates for German guns. Somewhere behind Leon's back, spread along 200 yards of shattered contour line, maybe 120 Americans are dug in. Riflemen, machine gunners, a mortar squad with a tube they've already run white with use. They do not know this patrol is out here yet. They cannot see through the fog from their trenches. If this recon team finishes its work, if they plant their signal panel, fix their distances, call in their fire, the hillside behind Leon will vanish under shells. An entire company could be erased in 3 salvos, a simple arithmetic of death, 7 men now or 100 men later. Leon's breath ghosts the inside of his scope, he blinks it clear. His cheek settles into the carved wooden riser he filed from a crate board 2 nights earlier, glued and banded to the stock. It lifts his eye exactly where he wants it, no strain, no muscle tension. He built it by feel and by memory of a machinist's jig. His right hand curls around the bolt handle, index finger resting alongside the trigger guard for now. The metal is cold and lightly oiled. Under his chest, the padded entry track digs into his ribs. His elbows sit in shallow, scooped hollows he carved into the crater lip for repeatable position. The sandbag wedge under the forend feels dead and solid. When he shifts his weight a fraction of an inch, there is no rustle, no grind. He is, in this moment, not a man in a hole on an Italian mountain. He is a tool fixture, and the rifle is the workpiece, clamped into alignment. The Germans close the distance, 91 yards, 84, 78. The lead scout pauses at a chunk of masonry, crouches, studies the slope with a field glass. The machine gunner shrugs the heavy weapon off his shoulder, resting its weight across a low wall. Not yet deployed, but close. Leon's heart ticks in his ears, but his breathing stays slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The same rhythm he used hunched over a mill table in Pittsburgh, watching a cutter chew steel. He listens past his own blood for other sounds, the creak of leather harness, the click of a safety, the faint crunch of boot on gravel. Smell rides the fog, wet stone, mud, the lingering bitter ghost of cordite from the barrage that dug this crater last night. There's also the dull, animal smell that hangs over battlefields in winter, sweet and wrong. He does not let his mind give it a name. Too tight to shoot from, one sniper from another company had said, looking into the crater yesterday afternoon. You'll break your teeth on your own rifle inside that thing. Another had grunted, you get stuck in there when they rush, nobody's pulling you out, Sarge. Leon had only shrugged and gone back to shaving the dirt wall with his e-tool. Quiet. Methodical, the way he had once filed high spots off a steel die, 1/1000th of an inch at a time. Now, as the nearest German steps to within 65 yards, Leon raises himself the last inch. 7 inches total from the floor of the crater to the top of his helmet. No more. The lip of the crater curves in front of his muzzle like the bottom edge of a clock face. His world is a narrow arc from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, fog-washed and full of men who don't know he exists. One scout begins unrolling the signal panel, bright color whispering against the rubble. Another plants the end of the range pole into the earth, sighting back up the slope in the direction of the American line. Leon exhales, long and slow, until his lungs are as empty as he dares. He takes up the slack on the trigger until it is a thought away from breaking. He chooses his first target, not the man with the panel, not the man with the range pole, the machine gunner. The MG-42, if it goes to work, can pin the whole hillside while the others escape. Kill the gun, and the rest might freeze. The crosshairs settle at the notch above the man's sternum, where tunic cloth bunches under the strap of the gun. Leon's fingertip tightens. A crack tears the fog apart, cut to black. In the next 90 seconds, everything would change for that 7-man patrol, for the American company crouched behind the ridge, and for the quiet machinist from Lawrenceville who dared to build a sniper perch the Army never asked for and never wanted to understand. Leon McBride entered the world in 1918 under the orange glow of Pittsburgh's steel mills, in the Lawrenceville iron belt where soot fell like seasonal weather and children learned early what the word shift meant. His father, Patrick, worked the furnace floor at Carnegie Steel, shoulders burned by years of radiant heat, lungs lined with the dust that never quite rinsed out. His mother, Margaret, pieced together threadbare wages as a home seamstress, filling the narrow row house with the smell of starch and mended wool. Leon grew up squeezed between an older brother, Thomas, whose hands were already calloused by 16, and 2 younger sisters who slept in the converted pantry because the house had no rooms left to give. Money stayed scarce even in good years, and in the lean ones, the family learned how to stretch a pot of stew into 3 days and convince themselves the orange light through winter windows counted as warmth. When Leon was 15, he watched his father sit silently at the dinner table as news came that Thomas had been crushed between a cart and a rolling mill housing. No ceremony, no long explanations, just a folded note carried home by a foreman and the quiet rearrangement of an empty chair. Something in Leon hardened then, not into bitterness but into a kind of sober precision. He understood, in a way that didn't need words, that carelessness was expensive and mistakes could kill. He began to notice everything in their world that rattled, scraped, ran hot, or trembled out of rhythm. He learned to read the warning signs in a machine's breathing long before it failed. It was the closest thing to control that a working-class teenager in Lawrenceville could claim. By 18, he had taken a job as an apprentice at Iron Belt Machine Works, a cramped and echoing building tucked between the river and a rail spur where freight cars shuddered past with the weight of a nation's industry. The shop smelled of cutting oil, metal dust, and hot steel. Leon spent his first year bent over tool benches grinding edges, filing high spots, honing blocks until they matched blueprints down to 1/1000th of an inch. For 6 years, from 1936 to the winter of 1942, he shaped his life around machines, lathe chatter guiding his pulse, micrometers teaching him patience, and old machinists yelling over the din that precision is slow because life is short. He worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes 14, eyes squinting through magnifiers until the world blurred into threads of steel. He learned to adjust his breathing to keep his arms steady, to remain motionless for 10 minutes at a time while aligning a jig, to shave a surface so flat that light barely escaped the seam. He developed hands that could feel vibration before instruments detected it, and a mind that treated alignment not as a suggestion but as law. Yet in every shop there were men who mocked his obsession. They called him level because he carried a pocket spirit level even when it wasn't needed, and they asked whether he used it to find the bathroom. Supervisors rolled their eyes when he suggested bracing a gearbox to reduce vibration. No one complained when his modifications reduced accidents, but few gave him credit either. Still, he worked silently, shoulders set, because that was the way of the iron belt. Do the job, trust the craft, and let the foremen believe what they want. On the evening of December 7, 1941, Leon was working a night shift when the shop foreman came running down the aisle, shouting over the machines that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. The word war moved through the workers faster than the smell of burning oil. When the shift ended, a crowd gathered at Kelly's bar 2 blocks from the mills. Some cursed the Japanese, others muttered that this was the country's long overdue reckoning. Leon stood at the edge of the group, hands wrapped around a glass of water, listening. He felt no sudden surge of patriotism, no appetite for speeches, only a heavy shift inside him, the understanding that the same precision he spent years learning now had a place in a world tearing itself open. He didn't announce his decision. He simply walked to the enlistment office 3 days later, signed his name, and left the iron belt with a small canvas bag and a machinist's calm acceptance that the Army would be louder, dirtier, and far more dangerous than any shop floor. Basic training did not surprise him. It was noisy, chaotic, difficult, but not in ways that bothered him. The shouting sergeants, the endless drills, the routines that made no practical sense were simply different kinds of machinery with different kinds of flaws. What startled the instructors was Leon's steadiness. On the rifle range he was slow to fire but uncanny in consistency, placing round after round into tight groups at 200 yards, then 300, then 5. The instructors told him to speed up. He ignored them, focusing on the tiny adjustments required to bring everything into line. "You breathe like you're measuring steel," one corporal muttered. "That slow chisel breathing, don't know how you stand it." Leon only shrugged. Within the platoon he acquired several nicknames, the Machinist, Level, and eventually the Mole, because he preferred cover, dug deeper foxholes than anyone else, and improved every position he was assigned until it barely resembled regulation. Officers scolded him for filing his rifle sight, for reknotting sling cords, for adjusting his trigger to a cleaner break. "This isn't a workshop," a second lieutenant barked, "and you're not here to invent things." Leon didn't argue. He simply kept his eyes lowered and his hands busy, making the gear work the way it needed to if he and the men around him were going to survive. When the Army asked for men capable of precision fire, Leon was quietly transferred into a marksman pool. No celebration, no ceremony, just a sergeant handing him a different rifle and saying, "Don't screw this one up." By then, it was early 1943, and the 34th Infantry Division had already carved a bloody path up the Italian peninsula. Leon boarded a troop ship in February, crammed into a lower deck that smelled of fuel, wet canvas, and nausea. He lay awake at night listening to the ocean slap the hull, marking the rhythm of each wave like a machinist reading a lathe spin. When storms rolled in, men retched in the aisles, and the lights flickered. Leon braced himself with one hand against the bunk frame and breathed slowly, horizontally marking how the ship tilted and rolled, already calculating the angles without meaning to. North Africa appeared first, shimmering with heat. Then came Italy. The air smelled of diesel and citrus along the coasts, then mud and cordite as they pushed inland. Weeks blurred into ruined towns, muddy foxholes, and the bitter cold of winter 1943. Leon found himself working unofficially as the man who could fix anything. A trigger that pulled too heavy, a scope mount that wandered, a sling that cut into a soldier's hand. He was quiet, efficient, almost invisible. Men came to trust him without ever hearing him speak more than a sentence. Officers remained suspicious, never appreciating a soldier who changed answers without asking permission. By the time his division neared Monte Cassino in early 1944, Leon understood that Italy wasn't a campaign. It was a grinding machine designed to chew up entire generations. Cassino itself towered above the valley like a monument carved from misery, a monastery turned into a fortress, surrounded by slopes where shattered stone mingled with the dead. The 34th Division had already bled heavily trying to take it. Rain turned the ground into a gray paste. Artillery shattered the ridge lines into uneven teeth. German machine gun nests stitched the valley with fire. Leon arrived with a small sniper and observer team under a lieutenant too young for the lines etched in his face. The lieutenant looked at Leon's quiet demeanor and homemade gear modifications and seemed unsure whether to trust him or reprimand him. But the division needed eyes. Leon McBride had learned early in the campaign that most dangers in Italy didn't announce themselves with gunfire. They arrived first as patterns, small discrepancies that whispered something was about to go wrong. By February 1944, the slopes below Monte Cassino had become a maze of these patterns. Tracks in mud where there shouldn't have been any, fresh scarring on stone walls, faint markers left by German patrols who seemed to understand the terrain better with each passing day. Leon noticed them because he noticed everything. But what unsettled him most wasn't the enemy's skill, it was the flaw inside his own army's doctrine, a blind spot no regulations accounted for. American infantry doctrine expected snipers to operate from high points of observation, preferably behind the main line, angled for clean fields of fire. It made sense on paper. In practice, Cassino was built of broken elevations and slaughtered architecture, a jigsaw of fall lines and dead ground where textbook vantage points didn't exist. The Germans understood this and exploited it with uncanny speed, sending recon patrols into the valleys and terraces, marking American positions with colored cloth strips and coated stakes long before artillery shells began walking across the slope. Snipers placed according to regulation doctrine often saw these patrols too late or not at all. Within the 34th Division, the results were devastating. In late January, PFC Gerald "Red" Dalton, a farm kid from Iowa whose laugh carried across campfires, took a position on a ridge line as instructed. From that height with fog pooling beneath him, he never saw the German scouts move through the terraces below. They marked his entire platoon's line before he realized what was happening. The resulting barrage killed Dalton and 17 others. The official report claimed he'd been outflanked. Leon knew better. Dalton had been placed where the manual said he should go, and the manual did not understand Cassino. A week later, Corporal Sam Torres from San Antonio, thinner than a rake, with a habit of singing under his breath, died when he attempted to relocate during an early morning patrol. He moved along the Army-specified route, a shallow draw meant to conceal movement, but the Germans knew the terrain as intimately as the Americans didn't. They had zeroed that draw days earlier. Torres never made it 10 feet. Leon helped carry him back, one boot missing, blood dark in the seams of his jacket. The third death hit hardest. Private Daniel Haskell, 19 years old, barrel-chested kid from Ohio with wrists like soda bottles, had shared a position with Leon 2 nights before. He wasn't a sniper, just a rifleman acting as spotter. They'd spent that night whispering back and forth about nothing much: hometown diners, baseball teams, Haskell's dream of opening a garage after the war. The next morning, Haskell was ordered to reinforce a forward listening post. It was positioned exactly where every map said it should be, a shallow depression facing a ravine. Regulations again. Leon had argued that the spot was a death trap, that the Germans used the ravine for infiltration, that a listening post there needed deeper cover or none at all. The lieutenant listened politely, thanked him, and cited doctrine. Forward listening posts required clear auditory lanes and minimal obstruction. Haskell went anyway. The position was overrun before dawn. They found him half buried in upheaved soil, throat bruised, rifle snapped across his body. Leon stayed with the body until stretcher bearers arrived. He said nothing, because his words wouldn't have changed the earth that had taken the boy. But something inside him settled into place with a weight that felt permanent. He filed 2 formal suggestions that same afternoon, one requesting permission to build forward low-silhouette sniper hides, the other proposing modified observation methods for early detection of German recon teams. He wrote them carefully without accusation, outlining the pattern of deaths, the enemy's methods, and how Cassino's topography required different thinking. He drew diagrams, listed distances, even annotated a rough terrain model. The first proposal came back stamped, DENIED, non-standard positioning not authorized. The second returned with a note scrawled across the margin: appreciate the initiative, Sergeant, but maintain existing doctrine. Terrain does not justify alterations. He didn't argue. Men who argued became problems, and problems did not survive long in war. But he felt the tension in his jaw when he folded the papers, that machinist's frustration of watching a system fail because the foreman refused to admit the blueprints were wrong. That night he sat by himself on a collapsed stone wall while the sky burned red from distant shell bursts. The air smelled of mud and cordite, bitter enough to taste. Somewhere behind him men were playing cards, their laughter brittle. Somewhere ahead, German scouts were setting stakes or marking stones in the dark. Leon stayed still long after the others slept, breathing against the cold, eyes tracing the valley and its knots of terrain. He followed the sloped lines in his mind like the grooves on a gear plate, seeing exactly where the ground hid movement, where silhouettes appeared, where angles converged. He knew then that if he waited for permission, more men like Haskell would die. The machine of war would keep running, indifferent to whether its pieces cracked, and he was tired, bone-tired, of watching pieces break. 3 days later, when he discovered the crater that would become his perch, he acted without waiting for any officer's evaluation. It wasn't impulsive. It was the calm decision of a man who had worked metal long enough to know when a part was misaligned and when the only fix was to take matters into his own hands. He spent the next 2 nights shaping the earth by hand, then more hours fine-tuning the angles with the attention of a machinist leveling a platform. Other soldiers stopped by to watch him work. Some shook their heads. Others joked he was building a bunker for one or digging his way to China. Leon responded with silence, the same silence he kept while aligning a die block, knowing that if he opened his mouth, he'd feel the whole futile weight of the Army's doctrine pressing back on him. On the evening before the German patrol approached, the lieutenant confronted him, not angrily but with a weary concern. He stood at the crater's rim, boots sinking slightly into the damp soil, watching Leon pack a final layer of burlap above the padded entry track. "Sergeant, you've already had 2 proposals knocked down, you know that. You know higher-ups want uniformity. You're placing yourself forward of the line. You realize what that means." Leon didn't look up. "Yes, sir." "That you could get cut off." "Yes, sir." "That this position is unofficial, meaning if you die out there, it's not on the books," the lieutenant said quietly. Leon kept smoothing the burlap. "It's still on me." The lieutenant exhaled through his nose. "Why this crater, McBride?" Leon finally paused what he was doing. "Because it will see them first. That's not regulation." "No, sir." The lieutenant studied him a long moment. "I can't approve this, but I won't stand in your way." Then softer, "Just come back alive. I'm tired of writing letters home." Leon nodded once. Neither man said more. When darkness settled over Cassino, the sounds of the mountain shifted. Wind pressed against broken stone. Far-off artillery thumped like a giant heartbeat. Boots scuffed in trenches as soldiers changed watch. Water sloshed from canteens, and the cold thickened until breath hung in the air like chalk dust. Leon walked forward alone, rifle slung low, moving with the quiet precision he'd learned on shop floors, feet searching for stable ground, weight distributed evenly, hands ready to steady himself if the terrain gave way. The slope around him smelled of wet earth and old explosions. Fog drifted in low, carrying the faint metallic scent of the monastery ruins above. When he reached the crater, he slid silently inside. The entry track fit his body the way his machinist's stool once had, exactly, predictably, without waste. He settled in and felt the angles he'd carved guide him into position. The sandbag wedge felt dead and responsive under his rifle. The cheek riser he'd filed from scrap wood nested perfectly against his face. Nothing rattled, nothing scraped, nothing betrayed him to the dark. He lay there for a long while, the silence deep enough that he could hear the shifting of his own heartbeat. He tested his breathing rhythm, matching it to the stillness around him. Every few minutes he scanned the terrain downslope, watching for the small disruptions that signaled German reconnaissance. Displaced stones, unusual shadows, unnatural spacing between cover points. He thought of Haskell then, not in a sentimental rush, but in the quiet clarity of someone who had spent too long watching patterns repeat themselves. One boy dead because doctrine couldn't be questioned, 2 more before him. He pictured the crater as a fixture, a tool engineered to interrupt that pattern. Sometime before dawn he heard it, a faint scrape of boots on broken tiles, the whisper of men moving in the fog. He didn't raise his rifle yet. He waited, letting the sounds grow distinct, letting the rhythm of their steps confirm what he already suspected. A 7-man recon team, moving with purpose, marking the slope just as others had done before. They would place their panels, measure their lines, record their coordinates, and within hours the artillery would come for the Americans dug in behind him. Leon breathed once slowly, then again. A machinist's breath, steady, measured, a countdown to action. He reached for the rifle's bolt, easing it open a fraction to confirm the chambered round with touch alone. No sound, no betraying click. The Germans were closer now, shapes forming into bodies against the dim light, equipment clinking softly as they advanced. Leon felt the cold stone under his elbows, the fine tremor of his own pulse in his fingertips, and the deep certainty of a man who had done everything he could with the tools he had. His decision had been made days ago, in the space where doctrine failed and necessity took over. In another minute, maybe less, he would rise the final inch into the 7-inch window he had carved into existence. His perch was not authorized, not recommended, not even acknowledged. It was simply necessary. And Leon McBride had run out of patience for anything less. The shot cracks and the fog jumps, sounds slapping back from the broken walls like a door slammed in a stone room. For a fraction of a second after the trigger breaks, there is only recoil, sharp, familiar, pressing straight back into Leon's shoulder rather than up, the brick-dust sandbag and carved hollows under his elbows doing their work. Then the scope picture settles and the machine gunner folds as if someone pulled his feet out from under him. The MG-42 slides off the low wall, barrel clanging against stone, tripod legs kicking once before coming to rest. The bullet has struck high in the chest at roughly 67 yards, entering near the notch of the sternum where cloth had bunched, the point Leon chose. 0 seconds, the patrol freezes. 7 men become statues in the fog, mouths open, eyes wide. Time stretches for them, but for Leon it compresses into a series of positions and angles. His hand works the bolt without conscious thought, lifting, pulling, pushing, feeding afresh. 30-06 round into the chamber with a motion so practiced it barely disturbs the bedding of the rifle. The M1903A4 is 43 inches of oiled steel and walnut, just under 10 pounds with the M73B1 scope mounted, and he knows exactly how it wants to move when he cycles it. In the crater, its weight rests not on him but on the deadened brick-dust sack, recoil spread and soaked into powder fine as flour. 8 seconds. The nearest scout, a man with a range pole strapped to his back, is the first to break. He dives left toward a collapsed wall, legs pumping hard, hoping to disappear into the broken line of stone. Leon tracks him through the 2.5 times scope, leading the blur of his movement by an inch of reticle width at 70 or so yards. The air is thick with moisture, humidity near 90%, and there is a faint 2-mile-an-hour drift from right to left, barely enough to matter at this distance. Leon still clicks the calculation off in his head out of habit. He exhales to the bottom of his breath, the crosshairs cut across the man's side as he lunges. Leon tightens his finger, feeling the 2-stage trigger break clean at just under 3 pounds pull, smoothed by his own stone and oil. The rifle barks again, the scout pitches forward mid-stride, momentum carrying him into the rubble, range pole clattering free. The bullet has entered through the lower ribs, angling through the body at roughly 15 degrees, 16 seconds. The patrol explodes into motion. One man flings himself behind the same wall where the gunner lies. Another scrambles upslope, trying to close distance toward the American line. A third dives into a shallow dip on the right side of the terrace. 2 more flatten where they are, trusting distance and fog more than cover. Somewhere among them, cloth and markers and instruments begin to scatter. Leon's mind does not race. It narrows, every breath is a measure, every second a cut on an invisible dial. His elbows grind a millimeter deeper into the hollows he carved. The cheek riser fits his face like a fixture. He works the bolt again, casing flicking up and then down into the padded entry track where canvas and burlap swallow the sound. 20 seconds. A figure tries to crawl backwards, away from the open ground, a man who had been closest to the fallen machine gun, now using the low wall as partial cover. Leon sees only half a head and one shoulder, the rest hidden by stone. At 72 yards, shooting at a small exposed slice is not difficult in theory, it is difficult in how little margin remains for error. Leon slows his breathing further, pausing between his inhales and exhales until the ribcage hardly moves. The world outside the scope fades. Inside, there is only the pale oval of a cheek against dark stone. He waits for the tiniest moment when the man's head rises just a fraction higher, scanning for the source of the fire. The scope picture steadies. Leon presses the trigger, feeling the sear slip. The report is crisp but short, its echo trapped by the undercut crater lip. The fragment of head vanishes behind the wall. Whether the hit is fatal he will not confirm now. In combat terms, that target is no longer a threat. 28 seconds, the man upslope is a different problem. He has sprinted almost 10 yards closer, trying to reach a broken stairway that angles toward the American positions. If he makes it, he can disappear into dead ground and potentially flank the line. Distance now is around 58 yards and closing. Leon snaps the bolt, estimates lead by feel, half a body length at this speed. He tracks from right to left, the faint breeze now helping instead of hindering. As the runner plants his foot to push off toward the stairway, Leon fires. The round meets the thigh just above the knee. The man tumbles sideways, colliding with a stone block, leg buckling in a way that says he will not be walking again. 36 seconds. 2 scouts remain prone where they fell to earth, pressed into shallow dips, rifles clutched but not raised. Another has vanished into the right-hand dip. Leon assumes he is there, breathing hard, wondering how far away this ghost shooter is. They do not yet know there is only one man. To them, the concentrated fire could belong to several. Behind them, down the slope near 90 yards, a shape he had almost written off as rubble shifts, a figure he had not fully clocked earlier, positioned as rear security. This one carries a map case and field glass, not a rifle. Forward observer, Leon thinks, the most dangerous man here because his job is to translate position into numbers and numbers into shells. The observer hunkers lower, calculating whether to retreat or complete his task. He chooses the meadow between and tries to dash to a new patch of cover. Leon does not let him finish the arc. At roughly 88 yards and moving diagonally, it is a shot that requires both terms of his old trade. Anticipation and alignment. He shifts just enough to keep the crosshairs a fraction ahead of the man's chest, then squeezes. The rifle bucks. The observer spins around his own momentum and drops, field glass skittering off into the fog. 45 seconds. Leon's lungs burn, not from exertion but from the careful rationing of air. He forces a deeper inhale, tasting damp limestone and old cordite, then releases it slowly. His ears ring dully with the compressed thunder inside the crater. Outside, the battlefield seems to pause. The remaining Germans exchange shouts in sharp, clipped bursts. He catches the tone more than the words. Confusion, anger, a tightening resolve not to die in place. They make their decision almost together. Two of them break from cover and begin a low, fast rush in a V-shape, one angling left, one right, trying to draw fire and flank whatever is shooting at them. The third rises only to a knee, raising his rifle to provide covering fire. They believe the shooter is higher up on the ridge. Their rounds chatter into the upper slope behind Leon, snapping rock chips and sending powdery dust down into the crater like gray snow. None comes close. They are firing at ghosts. 53 seconds. Leon decides on the covering man first. At just under 60 yards, kneeling, rifle half-shouldered, he is the one most capable of sending a lucky shot into the American line once he regains his wits. Leon drags the crosshairs over the man's chest, but as he does, the German leans left, changing the angle. Leon compensates mid-exhale and drops his aim to the belt line, where movement is less erratic. The shot hammers into abdomen. The man falls backwards, rifle slipping from his hands, legs locking in an involuntary bridge before slackening. 61 seconds. The two rushing scouts are now within 45 yards, closing hard, using every piece of wreckage as stepping stone between them and the American ridge. One is coming slightly right, one left, planning to overrun the perceived position and finish whoever is there with grenades. They still do not realize the ground they are running over holds the man they seek. Leon feels his heart rate climb. At this distance, with targets moving erratically across the scope, there is no time for careful calculation. It becomes instead an extension of the drills he ran in the dark, snap from point to point inside the narrow 5-degree window his position allows, fire at the instant alignment looks right, trust the work he did with angles and recoil dampening. His rifle is an instrument tuned for this. The right-hand runner reaches a low, jagged rock and pushes off, rising slightly as he does. In that fraction of elevation, Leon sees the line of the neck-clear rubble. He fires without waiting for a perfect center. The bullet tears through the side of the throat at about 42 yards. The man clutches at his collar and collapses, momentum dragging him forward onto his knees, then onto his face. 69 seconds. The left-hand runner stumbles at the sight but does not stop. He veers away, hoping to break the pattern, to come at the imagined sniper from an unanticipated angle. In doing so, he runs almost directly toward the crater, though he has no way of knowing it. Leon can now see him without needing to traverse much, just a slight shift left on the sandbag. The German's face comes into sharp relief at 38 yards, eyes wide, jaw clenched, every muscle in his neck taut. Leon doesn't aim for the head, too small a target for such a short, fast cycle of movement. He drops the crosshairs to the upper chest, where the lung and heart sit like vulnerable machinery. As the man's front foot lands, Leon fires. The impact folds him straight down, as if strings holding him upright were cut. 77 seconds. Smoke from his own rifle hangs low in the crater, mixing with the fog, giving the air a faint metallic tang he tastes at the back of his throat. His right shoulder aches from repeated recoil being absorbed in such a constrained stance. The padded burlap under his body is damp now with sweat despite the cold. Granules of brick dust have worked into the skin of his elbows. He barely notices. He waits, muscles locked in the half-tensed stillness of a man expecting return fire. But none comes. The hillside has gone quiet except for the distant, continuous war, the artillery far off, the occasional rattle of a machine gun on another sector, the muted shouts of men who have not yet understood what has happened here. Then he sees it, movement where there should be none. One figure, who had flattened himself early and somehow escaped his notice in the chaos, begins a desperate motion. He is perhaps 80 yards down and to the left, partially shielded by rubble. Instead of running away, he is unrolling something, a bright panel of color, the artillery marker, the very purpose of their mission. Fear and training wrestle inside him. Training wins. If he can place that panel, if he can raise it in approximation of their planned coordinates, the guns may not be perfectly on target, but they will be close enough to tear the ridge. Even a rough mark is deadly when converted into gun tables. Leon tightens his grip, his mouth is suddenly dry. This shot matters more than any of the others. The window for it is shrinking. The man is half under cover, half out, and the cloth is already billowing. 85 seconds. He inhales, holds, and lets his body find the tiny equilibrium point between strain and collapse. The scope picture steadies on the man's hands. They tremble as he reaches upward. Leon slides the crosshairs a hand's width down to the center of exposed chest just below the collarbones, aiming slightly low to account for the upward angle from the crater. He squeezes. The rifle roars in its confined notch. The recoil thumps into his shoulder, bone meeting stock through layers of wool and fatigue cloth. The panel flares, then drops as if the air has been cut from beneath it. The German's body jerks, arms flung wide. He falls backward into the rubble, the cloth half covering his face. 90 seconds. Silence drops into the crater like a stone. The patrol is over in a minute and a half. 8 men, machine gunner, forward observer, scouts, lying in frozen angles across 75 yards of broken hillside. No one among them has finished the work they came to do. No markers are set, no coordinates confirmed. Leon keeps the rifle to his shoulder. He counts to 30 under his breath, then 30 more. His eyes sweep the terrain for any sign of a second team, of movement, of a shadow that should not be. Only the fog shifts now, pooling and curling around the dead. Behind him, up on the ridge, the Americans have heard the shots. Some thought it was a brief German skirmish. Others thought it was their own outposts firing. The company commander sends 2 squads forward under caution to determine what occurred. They move by rushes, expecting ambush, hearts hammering, boots slick on the damp stone. Leon finally lowers the rifle enough to rest his chin on the riser, watching through the crater lip as his own men appear along the slope. They move past him without seeing. His position is that low, that deliberately unremarkable. He could reach up and touch a boot as it goes by, but he does not move, does not speak. He remains the ghost in the ground until the shapes ahead of him change from gray to olive drab around the fallen Germans. The first shout carries back through the fog. Surprise, then disbelief. Men fan out, prodding gently, turning bodies just enough to confirm what they already see. Each fall line points to a single source. All from one angle, someone mutters, Jesus. Another voice. Word about the morning's fight leaked up the ridge in fragments at first. Someone heard a burst of rifle fire. Someone else saw shapes moving through fog. Then a runner came back, wide-eyed, saying 8 Germans were down on the forward slope. By midday, every man in the company seemed to know that one of their own had stopped a recon team cold before it could mark the line for artillery. No one said McBride's name immediately. They just called him the Mole, the same nickname they used half-jokingly before, only now the tone had changed. Soldiers passing along the ridge would pause near the crater, glancing downhill as if trying to see the fight the fog had swallowed. Some crouched to inspect the strange geometry of the hole, its carved lip, its smooth floor, the angles that suddenly made perfect sense when they imagined lying there with a rifle. Word spread faster than any report. By evening, riflemen from neighboring companies were asking where that forward hide was, pointing and nodding and making mental notes like craftsmen studying another man's rig. The next morning, a sergeant from Company F walked up to Leon holding a shovel like a peace offering. He scratched his beard awkwardly and asked, "Mind showing me how you did this?" Leon shrugged and stepped into the crater with him, explaining with minimal words how you carve the undercut, how the lip must meet a certain angle to hide your silhouette, how the burlap padding eats sound, how the sandbag has to be filled with powder, not granules. The sergeant listened, tapping the shovel head against his boot. Later that day, the first crude copy of the hide appeared 50 yards to the east. 2 days after that, another. Within a week, Leon counted at least 4 along the regiment's forward positions, rough, uneven, sometimes too shallow or too steep, but unmistakably modeled after his. No one issued an order, no memo circulated. The army never officially asked for these positions, yet patrols that once slipped through gaps in terrain were now spotted sooner. Twice that week, companies avoided artillery barrages because scouts never reached their marking sites. The casualty list still filled, but the patterns shifted. Men whispered that attacks felt less sudden. One platoon sergeant claimed the forward hides shaved a quarter off the usual morning losses. Another insisted that for the first time in weeks, he could drink his cold coffee without dirt raining into the cup from nearby shell bursts. Battalion headquarters noticed the change without truly understanding it. A staff captain wrote that increased aggressiveness in forward observation has disrupted enemy calibration. Another report claimed the success was due to improved coordination with supporting arms. None mentioned a machinist sergeant carving shapes into Italian soil. None imagined the difference came from a place the manuals never described. Still, someone must have noticed something, because a clerk arrived one afternoon carrying a citation for Leon, folded neatly with a bronze star. The citation contained phrases like meritorious achievement, exemplary initiative, and effective defensive action. It said nothing about the crater, nothing about unauthorized positions, nothing about the 90 seconds that prevented 200 men from being turned into chalk dust. Leon nodded, accepted the paper, and tucked it into his pocket. He did not mention the fact that he'd seen other men receive louder praise for far less. The Germans, for their part, reacted the only way professionals in a deadly trade do. They adapted. Recon patrols began to move with greater spacing, pairing every 2 scouts with a dedicated rear watchman. They stopped carrying bright marking cloth openly. Instead, they tucked signal panels under tunics and used smaller, harder-to-spot codes scratched onto stones. Some nights they fired ranging rounds rather than risk close-in marking. Their patrols grew more cautious, more patient, sometimes abandoning missions entirely when the fog thickened. Their efficiency dropped, but their unpredictability grew. It was a chess game played through mist and rubble, and Leon could feel the shifting tension each time he crept forward. He did not relish it, but he understood it. Machines learn even when made of men. Spring crept over the battlefield in a way that felt less like renewal and more like fatigue. The mud thickened, the ruins softened around the edges, and the valley stank of rot and stone dust. Leon survived Cassino. He survived the marches north and the last months of the Italian campaign, though his right shoulder developed a stiffness that no medic could properly explain. By the time the war ended, he moved with a quiet hesitation, as if measuring each step against a blueprint the rest of the world couldn't see. When the Army rotated him home in 1945, he stepped off the train in Pittsburgh into the same mix of river smell, coal dust, and steel grit he had known since childhood. No band waited. His sisters hugged him. His mother cried softly. His father simply placed a hand on his shoulder, then the other, as if feeling for broken parts that needed alignment. Leon returned to Iron Belt Machine Works within a month. His bench was still there. The machines still roared. Coworkers slapped him on the back and asked how Italy had been. He gave short answers, muddy, loud, long, and then lowered himself into the familiar stool and began working steel as if he had never left. The shop foreman remarked that he'd expected Leon to be rusty. Instead, the younger machinists watched in awe as he filed a block so true that its seam vanished between his fingers. Whatever else the war had done to him, it had not dulled his precision. Now and then a coworker would ask if he had seen anything wild over there. Leon would check a measurement, adjust a dial, and say only some things. Then the machines would start humming again, swallowing the questions whole. He rented a modest apartment near the old row house. He helped his sisters when they needed it, drove his father to doctor visits, brought groceries to his mother. Winters were harder. The cold triggered a grinding ache in his elbows and the old crater-worn places in his ribs. Some nights he woke with the sensation of being pressed into earth, breath fogging in front of him, the echo of a rifle contained by stone. He never mentioned these things to anyone. They were simply maintenance checks of an older machine. Years later, when the Army updated its infantry manuals, small references began to appear in the section on sniper operations. Low-profile positions cut into natural depressions, forward hides for early interdiction of reconnaissance elements, use of terrain undercuts to reduce visible silhouette. The documents never said where these ideas came from. But men who had fought in Italy nodded when they read them. They knew such ideas had not come from classrooms. Leon never learned of the doctrinal changes. He rarely looked at newspapers, never sought reunions, never mailed in forms for historical interviews. He lived the quiet post-war life shared by thousands, half-remembered by neighbors, fully known only by workmates who saw his steady hands guiding machines to run true. He grew older, his beard silvered. He kept the bronze star in a drawer with a cracked wristwatch and a folded paper listing train schedules home from the port. If anyone had asked him about Cassino, about fording terror with nothing but skill and stubbornness, he might have said he simply did what made sense. When a blueprint is wrong, the machinist corrects it. When a machine shudders, he finds the fault line before it cracks. And when lives sit on the far side of a bad design, he shapes the fix with whatever tools he has, even if that means digging into stone-cold earth and trusting in angles more than orders.